Empire Total War was released in 2009 to critical acclaim and widespread hype. It was promised to be an epic-scale total war spanning most of the entire globe, complete with new features, the use of gunpowder, naval battles, and logistics that played a crucial role in the supply of your army. It also featured many scenarios, theaters, and towns in which you could garrison your troops in and fight battles. But did Empire live up to its ambitions? Unfortunately, it did not. There are many cut features due to development issues that prevented Empire from being the game that it should have been. And if you want to watch a particular video that was made on this, I recommend you check out Andy's Takes video, which really goes into in-depth detail about the cut content of what Empire could have been. And of course, there were bugs and mechanics that really just didn't make this game great as it should have been. I remember that when I got Empire Total War for my birthday, it was really messy and it was so buggy. I remember the UI bugging out with so many glitches and icons and symbols. It wasn't a great time. I thought something wrong had happened to the game. But then it was fixed by CA with multiple patches. Basically, the game amounted to something like this. You have a province, you gather money, you raise troops and you build a navy. There wasn't any deep gameplay mechanics, not many logistical features that could restrict you from playing, and factions did really feel the same. Whether you were fighting in Europe, whether you played France or Prussia or Russia, most of the nations felt the same, the tactics felt the same. Now, Empire Total War is a title that truly deserves a sequel, and a sequel it should and must have. A sequel that, as my good friend the Terminator pointed out in his video, could span the entire globe. With the technology that CA has currently at its disposal, it now has a ton of experience from the Warhammer games. But hear me out. The current Warhammer 3 Total War has 8-player co-op. Now let's take this back a bit. 8-player co-op. Now imagine, when Warhammer wasn't introduced and when the historical titles were coming, etc., there was a lot of demand for 4-player co-op, or at least allow 2-3 players in. In this Warhammer series, what we have is 8-player co-op. Now what does this mean for the future? It means that in any new historical Total War title, we could be having something potentially similar like this. We've had Troy, we've had Thrones of Britannia, and we've had 3 Kingdoms. I believe each of those titles were revolutionary in their own aspect, and they introduced many good features into the Total War series. But an Empire 2 would become essentially Europa Universalis 4. But what could an Empire 2 be in terms of scale? So firstly, I think it would be best to compare this to Rome 2. Like Rome 2, you would have over 400 to 500 or maybe even more unit variations within the game. Like Rome 2, every faction you choose would be different. For example, you could play as the Kingdom of Nabatea and be up against the Hellenistic powers, or maybe the Arabian powers, or maybe the Persian kingdoms, maybe the African kingdoms. In Empire 2, perhaps you can play as the Mughals and start to reform the empire. You could prevent civil-scale unrest. You could play an African kingdom and change the history of Africa itself. Like Rome 2, you could have different sets of factions to fight from. And from Attila you can take plague, banditry, unrest, mutiny, revolts and put them into Empire 2. Of course, need to focus on differentiating naval combat from different nations. Because naval combat in the 18th century is something that is so immensely important. If you play as any faction and you need to dominate the oceans, then you need a strong navy. And the only navy that's preventing you from doing that is the Royal Navy of Great Britain. I'll explain why. This will need to be specifically worked upon because naval combat will make up the core of the gameplay for factions that are ocean based and heavily reliant on the ocean. So such nations would be Great Britain, France, the Mughals, the Marathas, Ottomans and the Spanish, and many others. So let's compare this. For landlocked nations, the quality of navies would vastly differ from seafaring nations. Russia, for example, often fought with the Ottoman Navy for control of the Bosporan Sea and the Straits. It also fought in the Baltic Sea against the Swedish Navy. Say you had your Russian Navy and you were going to take them from the icy waters of the Baltic Sea to the cold ocean of the Atlantic or the warm current of the Caribbean. Your sailors could suffer scurvy and other diseases, especially in hotter climates. The Russians would not be able to supply effectively because there are no home ports in the New World, unless you conquer that home port, and you would suffer attrition. And if you are unable to drill your navies, this then becomes impossible. Or take Prussia. You could build a good Prussian navy, but to bring it up against the might of the Royal Navy, it's impossible. Effectively, you could even start with the Ottomans, who are effectively handicapped. Their goal would be to reform the navy to Western standards by possibly sending an attaché of military naval officers to French naval academies or Spanish naval academies. From there, they could borrow the technology needed to build the ships. But borrowing technology is simply not enough. You need your crews to be well trained. Part of the reason revolutionary France's navy didn't do so well was because of the removal of trained officers that came from the aristocracy. This effectively hampered Napoleon in Egypt, and especially the Battle of Abu Qir, which got rid of a very effective French admiral. In all of this, the Royal Navy remains the real endgame villain. They're basically like the equivalent of chaos. They're the real reason why most European powers didn't colonize outside much of their landlocked restrictions. The Royal Navy controlled the trade, the Atlantic Ocean, and often battled with its gigantic naval enemies, most notably the French and the Spanish, of which I argue were their equals. Only that Britain could afford to keep its navy at a top-tip condition because of its empire, and that to France and Spain, keeping their well-trained navies was expensive, not least because corruption at the top-tier levels of French and Spanish bureaucracy hampered their naval ability to resist the British Navy. And that could be budget cuts, that could be nepotism, etc. Build a naval academy, and from that naval academy you could have the best admirals and the worst admirals. And the idea basically goes that your best admiral, your ships follow you. Your worst admiral, your ships don't follow your orders, etc. Disease also plays a big factor, and if your fleet is under-equipped, not drilled, low on ammunition, and they are not at their home port, they can't perform effectively. But even with your strong navy, you need to rebuild it, train it, and oppose Britain. Basically, if you're going to challenge Britain, Britain can afford multiple navies. So what I suggest is, by winning battles on land, you expand your economy for resources. It is imperative. If you can build multiple ships and navies and challenge British hegemony on the high seas, then you will effectively build the keys for changing history. But I will stress this point one more time. This could be done with the Ottomans, the Marathas, the Mughals, the Russians, the Prussians, or the Swedes. Now, if you had Spain would be a very interesting faction to play as a naval base, because you could have 2-3 full navies, one in the Caribbean and one in the ports of Spain, and either one of them could be tasked with protecting the treasure fleets of Spain that provide enormous bonuses of loot and income. But treasure fleets of Spain can be taken down by storms near the Caribbean, and if you played Assassin's Creed 4, you will see that pirates and great British navies, they used to combat and raid these Spanish treasure fleets. So as Great Britain, it would be your goal to effectively raid those Spanish treasure fleets, or hire pirates, or play as pirates. Or as Spain, your objective is basically like Grand Cathay trying to protect its valuable convoys that basically go from one end to the other, and have to be aware of ogre attacks. In the same medium, your Spanish treasure fleet needs to be protected from the Royal Navy, or it could be the French Navy, etc. The other aspect of Empire 2 would be this. This is a game where you can effectively change history. You can reverse the declining fortunes of the Ottomans, have the Marathas rule in India and conquer Britain, you can do so much more. My only worry is that Empire 2 might end up costing more, and it may become like Warhammer. You will need to buy a lot of DLC, and I'm not sure what the solution is. And finally, I'm just gonna say this. An Empire 2 is going to be a massive game with a huge amount of content, a huge amount of unit variety, etc. And it's going to be great, it's going to be awesome, but it's going to be a lot of things to worry about as well. Because it's like this. It is imperative that a historical title be announced this year, and CA makes a roadmap of what is in line for historicals instead of CA is working on many projects. CA cannot afford to experiment with new eras just yet because they need to regain the historical fanbase that made their games popular in the first place. So Empire 2 or Medieval 3 will be on the cards. After that, we should go to new eras. And Empire 2 would be a historical chance to fix many of the issues that have been plaguing Total War from the beginning. What it would also do, it would restore a lot of lost features from Total War that needs to be put back in the first place. I wanted Empire 2, but I want it to be immersive. The main point is that I want Empire Total War 2 to be something revolutionary. I want it to be an amazing game, and I want it to be amazing. And I want a graphical overhaul. The very last thing that I would say is please don't forget to leave a like, share, comment and subscribe, and please do check out Andy's Take and the Terminator. They have made tremendous videos on this subject. This is my humble video of me suggesting of what I think should happen in Empire 2. There are many other features that I have not mentioned, but I imagine it will be discussed in the comment section below. So please let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and I'd love to engage with you in a conversation. Thank you.